China is the world's top semiconductor consumer, and now it's accelerating efforts to become self-sufficient. Last year, $47 billion in investment was raised as part of the so-called Big Fund, which aims to bolster the semiconductor industry and reduce reliance on other nations. While the value of China's chip industry was more than $180 million in 2024, and experts say that will reach close to $300 million by 2030. But one stumbling block for China has been this: extreme ultraviolet lithography, or EUVs. The machines help to produce smaller, more powerful chips. Well, currently there's only one supplier for chip production equipment, ASML from the Netherlands, but it's been barred from selling its most advanced models to China under pressure from the United States. A breakthrough was made in China in March, domestic EUV system. It's being tested by Huawei and could come into production next year. Experts say it could be a game changer. Xiaomi's 3nm chip is also a significant milestone. It's just the fourth company globally to achieve this and the first from China. And Huawei has also developed an advanced AI chip, the new Ascend processor. It's most powerful yet, and it's seen as a true competitor to the US giant NVIDIA. And talking of NVIDIA...
Well, it showcases that China's moving very quickly, far more quickly than the rest of the world is moving, largely as a result of being forced to do so because of the tariffs and blocks on U.S. technology going to China and China technology coming out to the West. That has driven China to over-execute, if you can use that as a term, and the end result is across a number, and your coverage covered a lot of this, across a number of areas, from automotive to... computers. China's not only coming up to parity, they're moving ahead very rapidly.
So what you're saying is that we're seeing a potential shift in global chip manufacturing power dynamics.
We are. The only thing that's limiting that shift are the barriers to moving technology between China and the West, largely sponsored by the U.S. But as the U.S.'s influence has waned, China's has increased. And those blockades aren't going to last much longer.
It's interesting, isn't it? You talk about those blockades. You know, NVIDIA's boss saying that those US curbs on chip exports that were meant to hurt China are actually going to hurt the US more. What's your take?
I agree. What this has done is driven the Chinese government to fix their lack of competitiveness in these technologies. Rather than buying from the U.S., they're building their own with massive financial backing, and they've closed gaps that people thought were unclosable in a matter of months. So it's frightening how quick they're going, and it's also frightening how little concern the West seems to have at the moment.
Okay, so the US and China seem to be owning this space, but what about Europe and other burgeoning tech hubs, like maybe India? Have they all left it too late to get in the game?
Possibly. The sheer momentum that China is showing makes it very difficult without similar levels of government funding for anybody else to catch up, and Western governments just haven't been all that interested in funding development efforts like this. So right now, it's China's government is actually driving a level of development and advancement that the other countries appear to be unwilling to match, and that's problematic.
Rob Enderle, it's been great getting your insights. That's Rob Enderle, President and Principal Analyst at Enderle Group.
Is your agency using WordPress to build websites? That's like carving a chicken with a handsaw, drying your hair with a...
Your bike, your couch, your kids' toys, even your car. Most likely crossed an ocean on a ship. And those ships, just like a lot of the stuff they're carrying, were very likely made in China.
China is by far the world's largest shipbuilding nation.
They have the steel, the aluminum, the... parts, the components, the final assembly. China owns that infrastructure.
Around 34% of all the ships that are currently on water were made in China. At the same time, about 57.1% of ships currently under construction are at Chinese shipyards.
Its share of ships produced globally grew from less than 5% in 1999 to over 50% in 2023. Not only does it dominate in shipbuilding, China also has vast controls over the wider ecosystem. Today, 95% of shipping container production is owned and operated by China.
A single shipyard in China now produces more ships every year than all of the American shipyards combined. Think of that. And it was a business that we used to dominate.
Donald Trump, having already started a trade war with China, has ideas about how to even the playing field.
We are also going to resurrect the American shipbuilding industry, including commercial shipbuilding and military shipbuilding.
Donald Trump is doing a lot of things to try and reposition the US in the world, tariffs, for example. These new measures are about a reset of the relationship with China.
Such a reset would have far-reaching consequences, potentially altering the landscape and economics of global trade. So, what's behind this push to bring shipbuilding back to America? And is it even possible?
This is a particularly American obsession at the moment.
Once upon a time, the US was the predominant force in shipbuilding.
The real high point for US shipbuilding was in World War II when they built these ships called Liberties. They built a few thousand of them and they really helped to keep the Allies in the fight against Nazi Germany. They supported supply chains and they were critical. What that did was create a very large shipbuilding capacity in the US.
But the world has changed a lot in 80 years.
US shipbuilding began to decline after World War II. By the 1970s, Japan was really taking over. By the 80s, Korea had joined, and by the 2000s, China had joined. And today, really those three countries are everything.
China has been slowly building up its power in shipbuilding over the years, but it's It's only in recent years that it's overtaken South Korea and Japan as the world's top shipbuilding nation. In the 2000s, China joined the WTO, and from there on you can see the economy growing, which really generated a lot of demand for ships. In Beijing's 10th five-year plan, it actually came out with a vision for growing China's ports and also shipbuilding industry. So that really laid the foundation and focus for its manufacturing sector, for its labor force, to really rally around this vision of creating a globally competitive shipbuilding industry.
Given the size and the scale of the way that China manufactures, this made sense. They were already very good at heavy manufacturing of things like steel beams and bars.
It has a really strong domestic economy that is export-oriented. At the same time, China has a really highly skilled, highly educated but relatively cheap labor force en masse, and these are the hands that you need to build really sophisticated ships.
The government then helped support shipbuilding as a strategic sector for them to move into as they tried to upgrade from basic manufacturing into more and more sophisticated products. And that sort of initial push of government plus the beginning of an infrastructure then becomes a reinforcing cycle. The more that you create ships, the cheaper each one is.
No roads, no worries. Dongfeng Rich 7 4x4 takes on anything.
China's advancements in stealth aircraft technology, particularly the J-20 Mighty Dragon, have raised significant concerns regarding the implications of stolen technology. The J-20 is suspected of incorporating elements from the American F-35, largely attributed to extensive cyber breaches targeting defense contractors like Lockheed Martin. This has led to fears that the J-20 is not merely an indigenous innovation, but a product of systematic espionage that has enabled China to leapfrog its technology.
You see this fighter jet with a non-stealth duct. Extra mods like anti-radar grills are used to make it sneaky. They stop radar waves from revealing the engine blades, greatly lowering its frontal radar reflection. The F-35 engine is usually hidden from the view thanks to its Y-shape intake. Sukhoi was casual with its inlet design. That's why you see this fighter jet with a non-
Three reasons why Japanese hate curvy women. First, in Japan, you're not allowed to stand out. But having a round body means exactly that. Next, Japanese women are told from the very beginning that their bodies just aren't meant to be curvy, so girls don't even think about developing them.
Imagine a country that, in just a few decades, managed to become a global powerhouse. A place that leads in technology, stands out in education, exports pop culture across the globe, and shines in sports. But here's the problem. While the country has reached impressive levels of success, it also bears a much darker title. It's one of the places with the highest rates of anxiety and depression in the world. How is it possible that such an incredible country, filled with achievements and innovation, is also one of the saddest on the planet? What's hiding behind these mental health issues in Korea? That's exactly what we're going to explore in today's video. To understand why South Korea is facing this mental health crisis, we need to take a quick trip back in time. The country's history is truly heavy, and I'm not exaggerating. Korea endured a brutal Japanese occupation that lasted 35 years. Then came the Korean War, which split the nation in two and claimed the lives of over 3 million people. Imagine what it means to rebuild a nation from scratch, under the constant threat of renewed conflict, always living with the feeling that something could erupt at any moment. South Korea had no choice. It had to develop fast or risk not. Surviving. That's how the so-called Korean economic miracle began, transforming the country into a global power within just a few decades. This took place right after those devastating events. The Korean economic miracle, also known as the miracle on the Han River was a period of rapid economic growth between the 1960s and 1990s. During that time, South Korea went from a war-ravaged nation to an industrial and technological giant. Throughout that era, the country was ruled by authoritarian regimes, notably under President Park Chung-hee. Still, they pursued an aggressive industrialization strategy, focusing on exports and investing heavily in key sectors like technology and infrastructure. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG were born during this period. All of this growth was driven by one main force: a hardworking, disciplined, and highly educated population. If I had to name another key factor, it would be the government's economic policies, which blended foreign loans with strategic structural reforms. However, this miracle came at a cost, and that cost is still deeply embedded in Korean culture today. The pressure to be the best, to stand out, and to never fail stems from a historical need for survival that took root during the very era I just described. This pressure is visible in all aspects of life, but nowhere is it more intense than in the education system. In Korea, children are pushed from an early age to strive for perfection. We're talking about kids as young as 6 or 7, who are already expected to get top grades, study for hours on end, and prepare for an ultra-competitive future. Even kindergarten has competition. It's as if life is a marathon where only
The F-35 is the iconic symbol of cutting-edge air superiority, widely recognized in military aviation. But a new stealth fighter, developed outside the US, is gaining attention in defense circles, Turkey's TF-Khan. It shares a striking resemblance to the F-35 in design and capability, with some claiming it could rival its performance. While the F-35 rules the skies today, the TF-Khan is engineered for the battles of the future, with every detail from its pan to the start. Though the F-35